military horror story. In my time in the military, I was assigned to an area in Mexico located on the border with the United States. Our mission was clear: to monitor and combat any attempts at drug and human trafficking. I was assigned to the night reconnaissance squad, and every night we patrolled the perimeter, studying the solitude of the desert landscape. Since joining the army, I not only found a new family among my comrades, but I also discovered a brotherhood. My comrades, people who over time and shared experiences had become great friends, enjoyed their work as much as I did. It was not just a job, it was a vocation, a calling that all of us were eager to answer for the good of our country. Despite the distance that separated me from my family, I was fulfilling a dream because since my childhood, I had always dreamed of a life of service, with the discipline and dedication that a military career represents. To serve my country, to defend our values and protect our citizens. We had been in that area for several years. We knew the environment already very well. In that time, we were able to arrest numerous drug traffickers, imposing law and order in a world that often seemed overwhelmed by chaos. But one of our most heartbreaking discoveries was that of a trailer full of people. An unscrupulous coyote was bringing these people to the United States in search of a better life. Unfortunately, the journey turned out to be fatal for some of them. 10 people, suffocating from lack of oxygen, dead from lack of food and water, were found inside the trailer. Among the victims, what broke our hearts was to discover that 2 of them were just children, their lives cut short before they could blossom. It is a sad reality that many people in Mexico rely on coyotes to cross the border, hoping to fulfill the American dream. Despite being fully aware of the illegality and immorality of these actions, somewhere inside me, I understand their desperation. Knowing the conditions of extreme poverty that prevail in some parts of Mexico, the heartbreaking reality of children going hungry makes you question why they do things. These people seek a better future for their families, one that they can provide for their children without the constant fear of poverty and despair. Although the method they choose is illegal and dangerous, the need for a better life is something we can all understand. On the battlefield of justice, we face these realities on a daily basis. In the attempt to uphold law and security, we also encounter humanity at its most vulnerable moments. It is a balance that forces us to always remember our own humanity as we serve our country. Despite many experiences we had in the field of service, we also encountered paranormal experiences and made a lot of sense, as we were basically in a desert location where the darkness was much deeper than anywhere else. Being alone in that place at night was a constant battle to figure out what was real and what was not, as sometimes the shadows and sounds were different, much more strange and sinister. One of those nights, it happened to us that while we were watching the area as usual, we managed to hear very strange sounds. It was as if many people were murmuring. My companions and I thought that maybe it was people doing bad things, trying to hide. We illuminated the perimeter with our flashlights, but we couldn't see anything. We walked around, but nothing. The murmuring stopped, but we knew that this did not mean that no one was there. We had to investigate who had caused those sounds and catch them if they were doing something that would harm the integrity of the country or its individuals. We went back to check the area, and behind some bushes, we could see something. Before our astonished eyes, an unimaginable scene unfolded. A group of individuals in dark robes were gathered around a circle drawn on the ground. adorned with sinister symbols, an open book, incense, and black candles. They were muttering incomprehensible words and performing movements that are done in rituals, giving life to a ceremony of black magic that seemed to defy natural laws. We were gripped by a shiver that ran through every inch of our bodies, watching captivated by fear and awe. The hooded men seemed to be invoking some demonic entity. We could hear them saying in a low voice, "Give us a life of wealth, my lord," was the only thing we heard clearly, because the rest was said in an even lower voice, and it seemed to be another language. With each word they spoke, the air grew colder and bone-chilling, and the silhouettes of the creatures seemed to twist and distort with each passing minute. Gripped with fear, we knew we had to do something despite our fear, so we looked at each other and nodded our heads, affirming that we were all ready to proceed. We introduced ourselves to the robed people and told them that it was forbidden to perform such rituals there. And the military horror story. In my time in the military, I was assigned to an area in Mexico located on the border with the United States. Our mission was clear: to monitor and combat any attempts at drug and human trafficking. I was assigned to the night reconnaissance squad, and every night we patrolled the perimeter, studying the solitude of the desert landscape. Since joining the army, they gave us a look full of hatred and resentment, as if we had seriously offended them. And now I understand that it was like that, because in that kind of rituals, the worst thing is to leave them halfway, as it can trigger something very bad, although that time we were lucky that it did not happen. To Major, they did not say a single word, left what was there, and walked in line until they were lost in the darkness. After a few minutes, we heard some diabolical laughter, as if they were mocking us in the distance. All that night, we heard strange noises, murmurs, and we even saw shadows distorting in the shadows. My companions and I were afraid, but no one said it out loud. We were military, and the military is not afraid, so we proudly covered ourselves until the end of the night. We distracted ourselves by telling good and nice things about our pasts, and the next day, when I went to sleep, I dreamed about those people making fun of me. But I tried not to make a big deal of it. On that occasion, we had everything from the ritual cleaned up the next day, but the people who were going to take care of it said that when they arrived, there was nothing left. That experience was definitely strange and disturbing, because what has to do with the devil is something strong and unpleasant. You cannot play with him or challenge him. But at the end of the day, it was our job, so we had no other choice, and we were thankful that nothing similar happened to us. After that, nor were there any consequences. We never saw those people again. And just like that, we lived other terrifying experiences in that desert area, but none like the last one, which was the most frightening, and the best word to describe it is strange, because my eyes had never witnessed anything like that. We have all heard stories about the devil, witches, nahuales, etc. But about something similar to what happened to us is not very common to hear, and that makes me fearful every time I tell it or remember it. It was a night like any other, with the full moon illuminating the desert. Our squadron had set out as usual, moving through the dunes with the wind whipping our faces. But that night, something was not right. An ominous feeling began to grow inside me, and though I couldn't put a finger on what it was, I knew something was out of place. We kept moving forward, and the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. My companions didn't seem to notice, continuing on with the mission, as if nothing was happening. But I couldn't ignore it. It was like a ringing in my ears, a heaviness in my chest, and even an urge to vomit. I thought that maybe something had hurt me and that's why I felt bad, but I knew deep inside me that it wasn't that, because I had never felt anything like what I felt that night. After a long time inspecting the area, we saw something strange. In the distance, among the dunes, there was a light, a soft, golden glow, contrasting with the cold moonlight. We stopped, watching it from a distance, trying to discern what it might be. I thought it might be a vehicle, or perhaps a camp. We decided to approach cautiously. With each step we took, the light seemed to get brighter, more intense. And then we began to hear the same humming sound again, low and steady, echoing in the air. That time my companions heard it too. We could see nothing but the light, and the buzzing grew louder and louder. We went there slowly, so as not to alert whoever was there of our presence. Finally, we reached the source of the light, and what we found there left us quite confused. It was a tunnel of impressive construction, illuminated inside with a warm light. It was not a natural tunnel, but seemed to have been built with great precision and detail. But that was not what took my breath away. It was the fact that the tunnel stretched into the distance, so much so that we could not see the end of it. I looked at my companions, searching for some explanation on their faces. But we were all equally puzzled. We had never seen anything like it. There was no record of such a large tunnel in that area. We had spent every night there and never saw any indication that someone was building something like that there. It was completely impossible. It wasn't something you build overnight. It felt like it had taken months to build. I knew it was not a figment of my imagination, as my companions were seeing it too, and were just as puzzled. None of us understood how that tunnel had gotten there. One of my companions said in a low voice that maybe we had never really passed through there, and that was why we had not seen anything. But that was not possible, since we always watched the whole area, so at some point we must have seen the construction. No one answered, because we all knew it didn't make sense. They gave us a look full of hatred and resentment, as if we had seriously offended them, and now I understand that it was like that. Because in that kind of ritual, after a few minutes, carefully observing the tunnel hidden in the bushes, we saw something terrifying inside it. Inside, we could see figures moving. Clearly, we thought they were normal people doing something illegal in that place. But we could not distinguish well because of the distance. UFOs and military horror story. The figures inside the tunnel seemed to be taller than an average human, although at the time we thought it was just a matter of perception. But they were moving very strangely, and we could hear nothing but the strange buzzing sound. For some reason, the light emitting from that place was unlike any kind of light I had ever seen before. It was brighter and weirder. My heart was pounding against my chest. This was not just a tunnel. It was a clandestine corridor, built with a precision and scale I had never seen before. They were probably storing weapons or drugs or something, although something definitely didn't add up. For a long time, we remained silent, observing. Although the tunnel was illuminated, the figures were far in the background, and it was impossible to distinguish who they were or what they were doing. Despite the darkness, I could see the expressions on the faces of my companions. They mirrored my own, full of wonder and fear. We were all veterans. We had seen many things in our time in the service, but this was something completely different. We knew we were facing something very big and even dangerous. Finally, We had to face it, because it was our job. As we hid among the dunes, watching the constant stream of figures, I realized that this was much bigger than we could handle alone. We needed reinforcements. We needed to let our superiors know. But first, we kept watching the tunnel, trying to calculate how many people might be passing through. But as we watched, a feeling of fear grew in me. Although we couldn't see the faces of the figures, there was something strange about their movement. It was stiff, inhuman, as if they were being controlled, like puppets. After a while, one of the military men gave the order with his hand to proceed. But at that moment, when we were about to go into the tunnel out of nowhere, the buzzing sound we had heard before intensified, and the ground beneath our feet began to tremble. It was a slight tremor at first, but it quickly grew stronger. Panic swept through me, and I looked at my companions, all with horrified expressions on their faces. The bright light from the tunnel intensified, blinding us, and even after that, we all had trouble seeing the light that was not of this world, although instinctively, we raised our hands to protect our eyes, but the light penetrated through our closed eyelids. When the light finally faded, I blinked several times, trying to clear my vision. When I could finally see again, what I saw left me petrified. The figures inside the tunnel began to writhe in a very strange way, and there were noises like voices, but it was something strange, as if robots were talking, what seemed to be nonsense, sounds we had never heard in our lives, as if it was something totally alien to this planet. And from one moment to the next, the tunnel, once filled with moving figures, was now empty. The figures had disappeared, leaving only the golden light and the constant humming. But then, something happened that horrified me and my companion. We instinctively looked at the sky without uttering a single sound, for fear of being discovered. Despite being military, that time we knew we were facing something we could not control. Surely, not even with 1,000 battalions. Above us, an object was hovering. It was huge, bigger than any aircraft I had ever seen before. It was illuminated with the same golden light as the tunnel, that light that was unlike any other on Earth. And although its shape was difficult to discern in the darkness, I could tell it was not a good thing. It hung in the air, silent and menacing. The humming sound we had heard earlier seemed to be coming from it, a low, steady sound that echoed in the night air. I could tell it was an unidentified flying object. But it wasn't like the ones I had seen in movies or read about in books. There were no flashing lights or rapid movements. It just hovered there, large and moving slowly and steadily, casting its golden light over the desert area. Panic ran through my entire being. I looked at my companions, searching their faces for help. But they were as stunned as I was. Their faces were white as milk, and even one of them was totally paralyzed. Even though I was dying of fear, I knew we had to act. We had to report this to our superiors. But before I could move, the object began to change. The golden light intensified, and the shape of the object began to distort. It was as if its structure was changing, reconfiguring itself in front of our eyes. Then, without warning, the object shot a beam of light into the tunnel, and we had to look away. I could feel the heat on my skin, as if I were standing next to a furnace. When the light finally faded, the tunnel had disappeared before us. In its place, there was only a void where the tunnel had once been. The unidentified flying object had disappeared as well, leaving us alone in the desert. I could not believe what had happened. It was like being in a horror movie. I had never felt so scared as I did on that occasion, and I think I speak for my companions as well. That night, we returned to the base in silence, still in shock for what we had witnessed. We reported to our superiors what we had seen, but I'm not sure if they believed us. After all, it sounded like science fiction, not reality, although later, a friend and fellow military officer quietly told me that maybe they knew, but that the government was probably forbidden to reveal that kind of information. So the best thing to do was to pretend nothing had happened, or that. We were crazy. Hardly anyone believed us. Although we had been many witnesses to that encounter, disbelief and skepticism predominated among most of our colleagues and superiors, who insisted that it was hallucinations or a bad joke. This lack of support and understanding from our colleagues only increased our sense of isolation and helplessness. We felt trapped in a dilemma, where on the one hand we wanted to continue fulfilling our military responsibilities, but on the other hand, we could not forget or put aside the magnitude of what we had witnessed, without leaving aside, of course, the fear we felt every night when we returned to the area. We knew that at any moment we could see that giant object again, and that maybe the next time we would not have the opportunity to tell about it. During the following nights, every moment became an unspeakable torture. The routine of the night tour, which once seemed so mundane and predictable, was now tinged with a terrible fear, a fear that crawled up our backs like a furtive animal. Every time we had to pass by that place, where we had lived that experience that defied all logic and reason, we felt a shiver that ran through us from head to toe. Place, however, seemed to mock our anguish. There was not the slightest evidence of the tunnel, nor of the giant object we had seen with our own eyes. It was as if the earth had swallowed all traces of what had happened there, erasing any trace of that inexplicable event. The most disconcerting thing was that, as the days and nights passed, even we ourselves began to question the veracity of that sighting. Doubt infiltrated our minds like an insidious seed, germinating and growing until we found ourselves questioning whether what we had seen had been real or simply the product of some extreme fatigue or stress. In the military, we are prepared for many things. We are taught to face the greatest challenges, to deal with dangerous and risky situations. But nothing we had learned had prepared us for anything like this. No training manual mentioned the possibility of encountering phenomena that defied all human understanding. Nevertheless, we were lucky. In the following months that we spent in that place, we never again witnessed anything like what we had seen that night. In time, the initial fear gradually faded like fog at dawn. We were able to breathe again, allowing us to focus on our tasks and responsibilities with a clarity we had lost for some time. Finally, we were moved to another area, this time in Sonora. Normality seemed to reign. We experienced nothing out of the ordinary again, nothing that could be considered supernatural. The nights became quiet again. The tours became routine again. Like my superiors at that time, and many of my colleagues, the people I told about what happened to us, nobody believed me 100%. But I know what I saw that night. And even though a lot of time has passed since then, I can still remember the fear I felt. The feeling of insignificance in front of something so big and incomprehensible. I don't know what that object was, or why it was there, but I do know that it changed my life forever. and left me with questions that will probably never be answered. Years passed, and I eventually retired from military service. But the images of that terrifying night in the desert never left me. Sometimes, when I look up at the starry sky, I wonder what we really saw that night, and if I will ever meet them again.